fact, we're all going to have to give up a little bit of our sovereignty in order to make the world work.
Essentially what politics is all about is dealing with today's problems, but it really is anticipating tomorrow's. And if you've anticipated them, then the only people who are going to be able to judge that are the historians.
But when people present ideas on your desk and you're reading them, I mean, there's got to be a part of you that says, ooh, you know, like going into war, decisions to go in, decisions not to go into the constitutional issues. There's all these things where you look at it and go, man, they're going to remember me for this, if this works or doesn't work. Do those thoughts pop into your head when you're having those?
No, that occurs later.
After you sign?
Yeah, no, what you're doing, you look at this and you sort of say, this is the right thing to do, this is what I'm going to do, and then you do it. But I suppose later on you begin to say, well, how are they going to judge this, or how are they going to judge that?
And the issue that the G20 is going to have to face, and the issue that every government in the world is going to have to face, is, are the markets going to dictate a country's economic and social policy, or are new national governments going to recognize that they have a duty to their own citizens to adhere to international norms and to work with other countries so that this terrible fear of contagion which exists today ceases to be the sword of Damocles hanging over an increasingly integrated global system. Furthermore, we must accept that putting global principles and standards in place is but the first step. These are going to have to be continuously reviewed by an international body whose only goal is the protection against systemic risk. And finally, those new standards are going to have to be mandatory, and they are going to have to be fully enforced. And this is where the rubber hits the road. Why? Because in a world of seamless capital markets, there are no borders. And if those are the rules that the bankers play by, then those are the rules that the referees must referee by as well. It should be pretty clear that a voluntary process of global coordination will lead nowhere. In short, if there's anybody who thinks that the voluntary subscription to global standards will be sufficient, then I'd like to introduce them to the tooth fairy. The current definition of sovereignty was established in 1648, and it was all about rights and the parochialism of rigid borders. In case no one's looking, the world has changed since then. Surely, if we have learned one thing from the financial crisis, it is that the definition of sovereignty today must now include sovereign duties and the responsibility of nations to each other. Clearly, if the G20, which is to do its job, which in the case of the question of bank regulation is to achieve the global coordination of national bank regulation, it is here in the evolution of the duties of sovereignty that the battle lines will be drawn. For with the designation of the G20 as the world's new steering committee, as it was said in Pittsburgh, the debate is no longer what will replace the G8. It is, will the G20 be given the responsibility to help make globalization work without the tools to do the job? Let me close just one more thing on this question of sovereignty. It's very difficult for a large country to accept that somebody is going to come in, like the United States or like the Europeans, and is basically going to come in and say, you're not doing your regulation in a proper way. Fair game. But what's going to happen when China and India are economies as powerful as the United States or Europe? And what's going to happen when there's a mortgage meltdown in India? What's going to happen when a Chinese hedge fund goes under, and that the results of that tsunami don't stop at the Chinese or the Indian border, but that in fact you find them in Idaho and Iowa and California? Who's going to deal with that unless we're prepared to understand that in fact we're all going to have to give up a little bit of our sovereignty in order to make the world work? I hope that that also is something that the G20 comes to deal with. So those are the issues that I've got to deal with. I think that we are really at the beginning of a very different era. 1944, the great minds of the world, Dexter White, John Maynard Keynes, and a bunch, essentially laid the foundations for the Bretton Woods institutions and the United Nations. And they built a system which functioned for over 50 to 60 years. I think that it's time to renew that vision. A very different world than one that dated of independent nation states who simply came together but could ignore essentially what was going on inside those countries. That day is over, thanks to Alan Locke. I think we've got to take it one step further. And we've got to say that, in fact, countries have responsibilities to their neighbors, and their neighbors are in every nook and cranny of the world. And I believe that that is going to become the debate of our generation, and it's one that I'm very happy to share with you. Thank you very much.
There's all these things where you look at it and go, man, they're going to remember me for this, if this works or doesn't work. Do those thoughts pop into your head when you're having those?
No, that occurs later.
After you sign?
Yeah, no, what you're doing, you look at this and you sort of say, this is the right thing to do, this is what I'm going to do, and then you do it.
We're all going to have to give up a little bit of our sovereignty in order to make the world work.
You do it.
Do those thoughts pop into your head when you're having those?
No, that occurs later.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
I think that it's time to renew that vision.
Those new standards are going to have to be mandatory, and they are going to have to be fully enforced.